I'm gerrymandering, and I approve this message. Virginians need change and hope, or whatever. And I'll bring change and hope or whatever by picking my voters and redrawing district maps to ensure I always get reelected. Heck, every single member of the General Assembly who was already in office got reelected last year thanks to the Commonwealth's unfair redistricting process. But me, I'm here to represent you. I'll listen to your ideas. I'll work tirelessly for your causes. Heck, maybe I'll get an aircraft carrier named after me someday. As your representative, I pledge to eliminate competition in elections. I'll eat away at voter rights by redrawing district maps. I can even draw lines to carve out families and neighborhoods who might vote against me. Isn't that super cool? My opponents might say that drawing district lines like this undermines the fairness of our democracy. It eliminates electoral competition, and it denies the rights of voters from every political party. Anyway, check out this tractor. So vote for me, gerrymandering. Probably definitely running unopposed. Approved and paid for by OneVirginia2021.
It is the most insidious, invasive part of the political process.
They're being manipulated, that the system is rigged against them, that they come out on the losing side.
It permeates everything.
It leads to a fundamentally broken system.
What I do know is that the status quo is not working.
Partisan success is more important than good government.
The new documentary is Jerry-Rigged, Turning Democracy on Its Head. Brian Cannon joins me. He's the Executive Director of OneVirginia2021.org. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Coy, for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, glad you're back. So tell us about the new documentary.
We're excited. I love that trailer, right? It's how a drone would see gerrymandering, and I think it's a good view of how they really do carve up neighborhoods with these districts and communities. The documentary is a great look. It's WCVE produced it. It's a bipartisan look at gerrymandering, mostly in Virginia, but it's got a number of other components to it as well, what they're doing in Ohio and Maryland and North Carolina, and even what they did in California.
So just remind us, for those who may have missed a few classes in high school, exactly what is gerrymandering and a little bit of the, gerrymandering 101 and its history.
Sure. Well, the history actually starts out this way in Charlottesville, where James Madison was the first guy ever that was gerrymandered, even before it was a term. But the basic idea is it's politicians drawing their own voting districts, congressional, state house, and state senate, picking their voters and making sure they get reelected. I mean, that's the gist of the whole process. It's kind of the inverse of what it should be. Instead of voters picking their politicians, it's politicians picking their voters.
And so we've had it since the beginning. It was created here in Virginia. What's the, isn't there something in the Constitution that says you can't do this?
Yeah.
You would think there would be, right?
You would think. And
politicians can't pick their own voters.
Yeah, no, it's an old problem, and it was never that bad. Back when Patrick Henry, as governor, tried to do it to Madison, it was a very blunt instrument to try to do it. But now there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't.
It's
unfortunately,
not there.
at this point. Well, maybe it's there, but we'll see what the Supreme Court says in the next couple years. But the problem is it's gotten way out of hand. Right? We went from a system of where it would take forever to draw these congressional and state house and state senate maps to now the computers can do it just like that. And not only that, but they can take our Facebook information and what magazines we subscribe to, which brand of toothpaste we use, and they can tell whether we're a Bernie supporter or a Hillary supporter, or a Cruz supporter or a Kasich supporter.
So you're connecting some important dots, because oftentimes people say, yeah, I know the government's collecting all this information about me, but I'm not doing anything wrong, so I'm not worried. Well, here's an example of what they're doing with that information.
Yeah.
They are profiling you, they're connecting you with an address, and they're using it to create these districts that essentially neuter democracy.
Yeah.
They kill democracy. So that's what they're doing with that information they collect about you. they're destroying democracy.
Yeah, there's actually a lawsuit in Maryland. A bunch of Maryland Republicans are suing in federal court over the fact that they've been retaliated against by their government because their state government packed them in to one congressional district in the western part of Maryland because they registered as Republicans and because there's enough information the politicians can gather, whether it's private or public information. They can buy it, you can buy the magazine subscription information and tell that those folks are Republican, and that's what they did to try to minimize the Republican vote in western Maryland.
Yeah, and folks may not realize that Facebook, for example, they're very eager to sell that information to whoever wants to pay the price. They sell all of that information about you to anybody that wants to use it.
Exactly, absolutely.
So where are we now, Brian? Well, let me ask you this. Let me back up for a minute.
Yeah.
What is for those who haven't seen the documentary or for those who've just watched it, what are the takeaways from your perspective? As somebody who's trying to take on this horrendous practice that destroys democracy in America and is leading a statewide effort in Virginia to do that. What, from your perspective, Brian, what are the takeaways from the documentary? What should we understand and what should we walk away with?
Sure. Well, I hope the first and main takeaway everybody gets is that this is a bipartisan problem, but it's also got a bipartisan solution, right? There are people in that documentary from all spectrums all across the political spectrum who are identifying the system is rigged and who say that we've got to fix it. Right now, so there should be, if you're a Democrat watching this, you shouldn't think that your party has a monopoly on virtue here. And if you're a Republican watching this, you shouldn't think that your party has a monopoly on virtue here either. Like, both parties are at fault, but you should be inspired at the end of this that there's enough people pushing for reform and doing this all over the country, right? It's not just Virginia, it's Ohio.
There are people against gerrymandering on the far left and the far right.
Oh, absolutely. From our last governor's race, Terry McAuliffe and Ken Cuccinelli both oppose gerrymandering.
Because they realized what?
It gets to the root of our democracy being turned on its head, right? It's politicians picking their voters, and fundamentally, whether nobody wants to win a rigged game. Right, everybody's willing to have, or most people are willing to have a fair system and let the chips fall where they may, and that's what you're seeing in this documentary. And I think it shows how bipartisan the problem is and how bipartisan the solution is.
Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for president, whom we have all been watching over the last few months, riveted by things he has said, not said, he has used that phrase quite a bit.
Yes,
the game is rigged. He specifically means that this election is rigged against me, with no evidence. But here's an example where we do have a lot of evidence that the system is rigged. And it's rigged how? To serve the interest of incumbents?
Yeah, mostly. A lot of folks think it's partisan. They think of partisan gerrymandering, so they think that it's a Republican gerrymander or a Democratic gerrymander, and that's true to some extent. But it's much more personal than that. It is politicians making sure that their own interests are protected first, and then secondarily, can I help my party out in this gerrymander? I mean, but it's themselves first. It's making sure they get that specific precinct, maybe that has their mom
in it. They stay in
office.
Yeah, right. They preserve.
Exactly. Yeah, and when we were coming up with the title for this film, it was this summer when Bernie Sanders had also used the term rigged a lot, and we didn't know the extent to which Trump was going to be using it. It certainly blossomed as a kind of the political term of the year. But Trump is right. He's just right but in the wrong way, right? It's not the presidential election. It's all of these congressional elections. There's 435 seats up for Congress, and only 37 of them are competitive, right? That's how rigged this system is.
Give us some examples that you learned about in doing this research and the conversations you've had in this work that truly illustrate how bipartisan this is.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first one would be George Allen. So former U.S. Senator from Virginia, former governor from Virginia. He was about to be a congressman from Virginia and got redistricted out of his seat in the early 90s. That was the Democratic-controlled General Assembly doing that to him right after the 1990 census. Governor Allen took that, or at the time, Delegate Allen took that and ran for governor on that. So they redistricted him out of his seat. He said, that's fine, I'm going to go statewide. And he ran and won, right? He was like 20 points behind, I think, Mary Sue Terry at the time when he first announced, but he became governor and then later senator. So when we interviewed him, we were just looking for that story because it's a great story, right? They gerrymandered him out of his seat.
At the very beginning of his political career, he's
stepping onto the
loses a seat in Congress specifically because of gerrymandering.
Yeah, they put him in another district that was, very intentionally. And so Governor Allen goes on the program, tells the story, but leads off right away with the system's rigged, right? And you got to fix this. And I love what he said because he's like, we've got to fix this for the country, but more importantly for Virginia. And I think he's a very Virginia first kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's
and you can't get any more conservative Republican than somebody like George Allen.
Correct.
And for him to say this is rigged,
yes,
that's quite a statement.
Because in some cases the rigging benefits his own party in Virginia. Here.
It sure
Not all
does.
of it, but some of it benefits Republicans, some of it benefits Democrats. But there's definitely a shot at Republicans might not win as much, and Democrats in certain areas might not win as much if you unrig the process.
Right. How do you unrig the process? How is this done? Because the science, the real science, the big data, as we say, the data collection that goes into drawing these lines. For those who've never seen it happen and don't understand the algorithms that are used, the computer programs that are used, it's mind-blowing how that can happen. And just give us, before he's talking about some of the cures, give us an example of some of the most egregious examples of gerrymandering that you've seen in Virginia.
Sure. Well, I think one of them is right here in Charlottesville. The northwest corner of Charlottesville is in a Senate district that runs all the way up to Culpeper and all the way over to Fredericksburg. And it's kind of a square, so it actually doesn't look that bad.
The Virginia Senate.
The Virginia
Senate
State Senate for Virginia. Yeah, it's the 17th State Senate district. And that district is a heck of a gerrymander for three reasons. The first, it's a Frankenstein district, which most all of these are, right? There's no, if you remember Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein put together the monster from very bits and pieces of human corpses. Well, think about that. These are communities that politicians are carving up and taking bits and pieces of it and lumping it together in a district that sort of looks like something, but isn't really recognizable as any specific community, except for it's whatever that district is, right? That's the only commonality between it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first
somebody
part.
Put a number on it.
Yeah. Then the second part is how bipartisan it is, because the 17th Senate district was drawn by Democrats to protect a Democratic incumbent senator, but it was also passed by a Republican House and signed by a Republican governor, because the Republican House was also trading out their gerrymandered districts in exchange for it. So Virginia's been gerrymandered by both parties this decade.
Yeah. And it's often about deal making.
Yeah, it's kind of the worst bipartisanship you would get.
I've seen some examples of some districts in Virginia where the line will be on a street and then all of a sudden it'll go out into a river and then go downriver and then come back in as if the river should be included, but the river's only being used so they can get further down.
So they can get down, you need like a jet ski to get around.
Yeah, it's just crazy and it makes no sense unless you're the politician who's going to benefit from doing it that way.
Exactly.
And that's the only way it makes sense, because they don't really represent communities anymore, which, to pull the camera way back here, that's the original intent, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what Madison talked about when he framed the Constitution, was let's represent communities so that they can have a voice in our government. And not just communities, but all the different factions of our political spectrum. And right now what you're seeing is, since the primaries are paramount and the November elections matter very little for these congressional seats in State House and State Senate, is that only the far right and far left are really controlling the dialogue. And not that they shouldn't have a role, but it doesn't mean they should have the only role in selecting our
And
candidates.
Because of gerrymandering, and this is the kicker, and this is one of the takeaways, because gerrymandering has never been so pervasive as it is today, has never been so strong as it is today, has never been so scientific, as it is today. Because of that, it is creating districts that favor the extremes of the political spectrum.
Exactly.
So that the real elections in these communities isn't in November, it's the primaries. And you have people trying to out-left or out-right each other when they go to stand for political office.
Exactly. And so you end up with a situation where moderates are almost, an extinct animal in Congress. I think there's Tom Davis's book, A Partisan Divide, says there's like 3 left in the House of Representatives out of, when in 1982 there was like 78%, 79% moderates. Now it's literally just down to 3 people. So, what kind of policies do you get? And forget the complicated stuff like what are we going to do with guns, or what are we going to do with a budget or entitlement reform. Think of something as simple as Zika, right? Just funding emergency funds to handle the Zika crisis.
They can't do that.
They can't even get out of their way to do that, right? So what government, it's not functioning for us at all.
Right. So gerrymandering creates a system whereby the people that you send into those halls of power to have these important conversations and make the sausage that creates the policies that deal with the challenges we face, gerrymandering sends in people who are absolutely opposed to working with each other. They don't benefit from it.
Yeah, well, and it's not that...
They don't want to compromise.
They don't want to... It's not that the folks on the far right or far left don't have a place, right? They should be represented there. But there also should be folks in the middle, and we're missing those. And those are the people that have historically been the kind of connective tissue to get things done, to find the right compromise between a principled position that people hold dearly and can't compromise, and what can we get done to move the country forward, right? And you need all of those factions represented in our government. That was the whole genius of the Madisonian, compromise here.
And one of the great examples of that was, for all its faults, in 1787 when they sat down to write the Constitution. If you think about it, they did it in 4 months. 4 months. And you don't think they were yelling and screaming and had arguments and they were points of disagreement? And it was far from perfect, far from perfect, and has had to be amended and changed considerably over time. But the mere fact that they could actually get on the same page, literally, in 4 months, we'd never be able to do anything like that today.
It feels like it's a different world, doesn't it?
Yeah. Brian, let's take a quick break. We're talking with Brian Cannon of OneVirginia2021, and the website is onevirginia2021.org. The new movie is Jerry-Rigged. I'm Coy Barefoot. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The new documentary film is Jerry-Rigged, Turning Democracy on Its Head. Co-produced by OneVirginia2021. Brian Cannon is the Executive Director of the organization, which is leading a statewide effort in Virginia to combat and hopefully finally bring an end to this old, insidious practice which has never before been so corrosive to our democracy. Brian, you mentioned lawsuits. You mentioned the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
People are actually suing the government, right, for doing this.
Yeah, it's a mess. And there are other states. I'd love to say Virginia's on the bleeding edge of this, but if we get reform, we'll still be a little behind other places that figured this out. But there's a number of efforts, whether they're grassroots, legislative, or in the courts, to fix this. And I think there's some really interesting things going on in other states about this.
Yeah, so what's going on? I mean, what do you point to? First, the lawsuits.
Yeah.
What's happening and what could make it to the Supreme Court that might have some impact in Virginia?
Yeah. So the first one is in North Carolina, and North Carolina had to redistrict mid-decade per a court order because they racially gerrymandered their districts.
Yeah.
The court found that, struck
Very
down the
intentionally racially motivated.
Yeah, and that's what they. Well, I mean, in fairness, the folks who drew the districts originally would say, I didn't do it because they're black. I did it because they're Democrats. So there's some argument over there, but the court found it was a racial gerrymander. So they redrew the lines, and the head of the North Carolina Senate committee, who was in charge of the redistricting, when they were passing the lines, when they were passing the new maps, said, let me be very clear, this was not a racial gerrymander, this was a political gerrymander. The only reason we have 11 Republican congressional seats in this map is because I couldn't find a way to get a 12th Republican congressional seat in this map, right? He was very explicit that this was a partisan gerrymander. And so while it's hard to tell sometimes whether things are partisan or what lines were drawn for exactly what reason, though I think most of you can always say it's partisan, this is a clear case of a partisan gerrymander, and the court has been divided over this issue of how do you measure gerrymandering, but there's at least 5 votes on the court that say partisan gerrymandering should be illegal, and this guy admitted it. So that lawsuit's proceeding, which will be interesting, because usually the court's been asking for a measurement for it. And some of the other states, like Wisconsin, has provided a measurement mechanism for it.
Yeah. So if the Supreme Court, when do they expect to hear that? You know, I mean,
probably next term. So not this term that we're in now. Probably the following.
it could be huge.
That could be amazing, right? If you can't say we did it for political reasons, now they'll have to come up with some other fig leaf to say, oh, we did it because of this community or whatever. That's at least a better place to be, rather than just letting them brazenly admit it's political gerrymandering. But there's more to it too, because there's a case out of Wisconsin right now that's very interesting and should be interesting for Paul Ryan, because that's, the Speaker of the House is from Wisconsin. Yeah. And they did what's called a partisan efficiency gap, where they measured the number of wasted votes for the winner in each race. So you're looking at if there are 100 votes cast and Coy, you win by you need 51 votes to win, but you ended up winning with 60 votes. Well, that would be 9 wasted votes, right? So the winner, add up those numbers. What you'll see in a partisan gerrymander is one side will have a lot of wasted votes and the other side will have very few. And if it's a big enough discrepancy, then it's a partisan gerrymander.
The red light is going off. Hey, this is gerrymandered.
Yeah, because
it's not
goal
even.
because the goal is to have one team waste more votes than the other. Right? You want to maximize your votes and waste the other guy's votes.
Right.
So that's a really effective way to measure partisan gerrymandering. And that's coming before the court. We're actually waiting on an opinion now for the 3-judge panel out in Wisconsin.
Right.
That could also be before the U.S. Supreme Court in the next year.
So what can we look at, Brian, around the country and point to states, municipalities where they're doing it right?
Yeah.
I mean, are there any examples of anybody out there who figured it out how to move this political system past gerrymandering, where it's more fair, where you have moderates who can actually win office, and we can have a more substantive political conversation that isn't all about the far left and the far right screaming at each other?
Yeah. Here's what's great about our democracy. This is a state issue. The U.S. Constitution leaves it to the states, and states have been fixing this, right? So California and Idaho and Iowa and Arizona and all of these, they're different ways of doing it. And none of them are perfect. All of them are better than the way we do it in Virginia today. Every single one of them. I would say that Dave Daly, the former editor-in-chief of Salon.com, wrote a great book on this topic and of the recent reform efforts. And he's really critical of some states and their reform and how it's not perfect. But he holds Iowa up as the model. Iowa's been doing it for the longest. If I can make a baseball analogy here, you got a batter.
You can. With me,
with you,
can. Yes. So as long as you don't draw too much attention to the fact that the Braves had a horrible season, I'll be okay.
Not at all, but it is October, right? So so we're looking at, the way I view this is you got batter and a pitcher, opposing political sides. Do you want the pitcher calling the balls and strikes, or do you want the batter calling? You need an umpire. Right? You need and so for us, you need a commission to do that. That's the analogy here. You need a commission, but you need a commission that has good, clear rules as to what a ball and a strike is, what's an out, what's safe, all these things. And so you need an umpire, but you need a good rule book to go along with that umpire. Now, some states have an umpire set, a series of umpires there. Some states just have the rule book, and different ones have this. Iowa actually doesn't have an independent commission. They've got a commission that is advisory only, but mostly the lines are drawn by the bureaucrats, the people who actually write the law for the lawmakers. The Department of Legislative Services would be the equivalent in Virginia.
In Virginia, right.
But they've got a heck of a set of rules to pin in the gerrymandering.
And the legislatures can't go in and put their thumb on the scale or change the rules willy-nilly.
Yeah, they can either accept or reject what the folks draw. the bureaucrats draw for them. And if they accept it, then it's passed. If they reject it, they can reject it with amendments, right? Which is fair. Like, hey, you missed this community. I represent these people, and that's totally fair. They might not get it right the first time. They go back and forth 3 times, but the legislators don't actually get to draw the districts, and that's the key part.
Which is what they're doing now in Virginia.
Yes.
They are literally picking their own voters.
Absolutely. Yeah, carving up neighborhoods to do so. Like, if you ever wonder why the district looks funny, it might be because they knew there were more of one party or another on one side of the line.
Yeah.
But California's figured this out. Idaho's figured this out. Ohio just passed reform last year. We'll see what the implications of it when they redistrict in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah.
What that looks like.
It could completely transform what our politics looks like, what our democracy is. I mean, taking this on, this is, as far as I'm concerned, along with money in government and rent-seeking economics and regulatory capture, gerrymandering is one of the biggest dynamics of corruption that we have for our political process.
Yeah.
It's destroying our democracy.
Yeah, and the whole point of the lower house in our Congress was that they would bend to the will of the people, that they would be the most susceptible to that if you had a landslide election in one way or another, that the House would represent that. The Senate wouldn't, the U.S. Senate wouldn't. But then the House of Representatives would bend to the will of the people because they were up for every re-election every 2 years. And when you've got 435 seats up for election and only 37 of them are competitive, nobody's listening to us.
Yeah. So Brian, what are you running up against in Virginia? When you have these conversations with legislators, when you have these conversations with big money donors, and is it as simple and as raw as, hey, we've been doing it this way for a long time, I benefit from this, I'm not going to change it?
Yeah.
I mean, is that it?
Yeah, there are 2 types of objections. There's that, right? There's this benefits me, show me why I should ever move.
Well, where's my motivation
Yeah.
to fix this? Sure, it's destroying democracy, but it's keeping me in office.
And there is that. And I would love to say, the good news is there's not a lot of people that make that argument, but there are some people who do. And those are the people that put party first. They put party above Virginia, they put party above good government, they put party above their community.
Sometimes above the principles they like to say they believe in. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so, and they're on both sides. By
Absolutely
the way.
on both sides.
No party owns a monopoly on this one. So there are those folks, but there are few and far between. The vast majority of the rest who have objections have real genuine concerns about what type of umpires we're putting out there if we were to have a commission.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valid way to do it. You could look
if you look at the state corporation and commission in Virginia, that's not a great example of an umpire. One could make the argument that they rubber stamp what big business in Virginia wants, and they're not much of a watchdog.
Yeah, exactly. And Arizona's a commission that has an independent commission that people have said has been hijacked by, in that case, the Democratic Party out there. So there are examples of bad commissions. I think we've got proposals that would address those issues. You can't have legislators serve. You've got to have a supermajority to get things passed, and you got to have a good rule book. I mean, most importantly, you just can't throw guys out there as umpires without a rule book. You got to give them good rules that keep communities together and would make political gerrymandering illegal. And that's what you're looking at. But there's some valid concerns about how do you make
And if staff is doing it, you've got to make sure that they're safe in their jobs. They don't want retribution. You were fired because you drew lines that, even though it was scientific and was fair, it didn't benefit me. I'm a powerful guy in the Senate or the Speaker of this or that, so I'm going to get you fired.
Exactly. And there's some valid questions about that. And the other thing you hear is a lot of arguments that say that, well, that might be good, but it's not perfect. And that's what I don't buy. It's like, we've got a bad system right now. There's clearly a problem.
Let's at least move towards good.
Yeah, can we get it? Yeah, and I think Mark Warner in our documentary makes that really clear. He's like, I'm not 100% sure what the solution is, but I know we can't not have one.
What's the saying? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Exactly. So there are people that want to work on this, and hopefully One Virginia gives them a broad enough umbrella to say that no matter where you are in the political spectrum, if you believe we can make this a little bit better, you can be a part of our team and help us with the solution.
Brian, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work you do. Sincerely.
Thank you.
The film is Jerry-Rigged, Turning Democracy on Its Head, and it's showing all of this week on PBS stations throughout Virginia. You can learn more online and support this work at OneVirginia2021.org. I'm Coy Barefoot. The complete archive of this program is available online at Media and Citizenship.org. Have a terrific week, and you all be good to each other.